is what's going on. Awesome. I have the real privilege of introducing Claire and Bella today, our guest speakers who work for the Catholic Charities in Washington, D.C., an organization that is the social ministry outreach of the Archdiocese of Washington. So again, as you know, we are in the midst of Poverty Education Week, and our theme this year is specifically the dignity of the human person, which Catholic Charities seeks to uphold for every individual through the work that they do. Claire and Bella are here today to talk specifically about how the pandemic has impacted those who experience homelessness. Claire and Bella, thank you so much for being with us today. And they asked ahead of time, since their presentation will run the length of the period, if anyone has any questions that they want to ask our speakers today, to email those to me. I'm going to throw my email in the chat, and feel free to email those to me. They'll be able to see those questions, respond, and we can hand those back to your religion teachers at the end of class. So Bella, I'm going to make you a host, and ladies, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Ms. Coffey. Yes, Bella and I are very excited to be here this morning. Just to introduce ourselves a little bit further, my name is Claire Sanfilippo, and I am the volunteer manager at Catholic Charities. And with me is my colleague, Bella. Bella, you want to say hi?
Hi there, I'm Bella Pinkley-Gadelia. I am the volunteer coordinator in Catholic Charities and very excited to be here.
So as Ms. Coffey said, we expect our presentation to run the length of this period. We will be talking today about homelessness, and in particular, how homelessness and COVID-19 have affected the population in DC. This is obviously a really weighty topic. There's a lot that we could talk about, but because of time, we have to really condense it. So we're going to go a little fast. There's a lot of information, but we hope that you can take away some facts, maybe dispel some myths or stereotypes you have in your head, and hopefully have some questions that we can answer later to help you continue your education and your journey on this topic. So to start, I do want to give a brief overview of Catholic Charities. And while I do that, in the chat, if you could take a moment and type what comes to your mind when you think of homelessness, any words or associations that you have with the word homelessness. So while you think on that, Catholic Charities of the Archdiocese of Washington is the social service arm of the diocese. We run about 60 different programs across the area, including in DC, Montgomery County, Prince George's, and Southern Maryland. We have everything from homeless shelters to medical clinics, legal clinics, immigration support, job trainings, food pantries, you name it, we have it. By far, our largest department is our housing and homeless services. We operate 5 low barrier shelters in the district. Low barrier means that there is no qualification for entry. You can just show up and get a bed for the night. We also have a couple of transitional housing sites where we work with individuals to transition them from crisis disability, as well as a few permanent supportive housing sites as well. So it's a really big issue, and we do our best to work with the needs of individuals. So I see in the chat a lot of really great answers and associations that I think are obvious and understandable why you would associate these words with homelessness. I want to call on a couple of people and have a bit of a discussion. So I see that Molly Morin said, without proper needs. Molly, do you want to unmute yourself and just, quickly tell us what you meant by that?
Sure. I meant just they don't have the needs to financially support themselves in the sense of everyday food, shelter, other needs.
Absolutely. And I see a couple other people. I see Kevin McCormick also said people who cannot support themselves financially. I think that's a pretty fair assumption. It seems like a lot of you said things along that lines. I see Brian Garzini said without shelter. Jackie Gilmore, same thing, no roof over their heads. So yeah, I think those are pretty fair stereotypes of what comes to mind when we think of the word homelessness. So today we're going to talk a little bit about that, but also try to help you understand some of the causes that lead people into these situations and some of the systems and structures that make it hard for them to get out. With that being said, Bella, next slide.
Thank you, Claire.
So, turning to Bella now.
Thank you, Claire. So before we get started on us talking at you and telling you everything we know about homelessness, there is this little activity that we can do together, and it's a privilege and poverty activity. You can see that there is an X in the middle there. That's where we will start. You can place your finger right on that X, and as I ask questions, you will either move to the right or move to the left. And I just want to explain to you guys that the objective of this activity is to just get us thinking about what advantages and disadvantages we may have had like growing up, and which advantages and disadvantages we may have now. It just gives us a sense of where our starting point is before we jump into learning about all those experiencing homelessness and housing instability. So the idea here is not for anybody to feel guilty or uncomfortable. It is just to be an activity for us to raise awareness, right, of where we are. So I will ask a couple of questions now, and you can just move your finger on the screen. First question. Growing up, if there were people who worked for your family as housekeepers, gardeners, nannies, etc., move your finger to the right. Growing up, if your parents spoke the primary language in your community, move your finger to the right. Growing up, if one of your parents was unemployed or laid off, not by choice, move to the left. Growing up, if your family ever had to move because they could not afford the rent, move to the left. Growing up, if there were more than 50 books in your house, move to the right. If your family owned a car when you were growing up, move to the right. If you were raised in a single parent household, move to the left. Growing up, if you ever had to worry about the utilities being shut off, move to the left. Okay, so now if you could, again, in the chat, if you could just in one or in a couple of words, tell us how you felt during this exercise. Again, the idea here is not to explain our privilege. We all know each story is unique. It's just for us to start our reflection on the subject. And this is a good place to start by looking at our experiences. Did anything come up on the chat, Claire?
Sorry, I'm muted. I see a lot of people saying that they feel grateful and lucky to have certain privileges, and as you should be. If you have parents who can, or guardians or whoever who can give you all of these things, that's a wonderful thing and absolutely nothing to be ashamed of. I know so often privilege is a pretty weighty word and often used in negative context. But as Bella said before, the reason that we talk about it today is to understand where we come from and our own perspectives and lived experiences before we talk about someone else's. Great. Yeah, I see a lot of people saying that they're grateful and blessed, and that's wonderful.
That's wonderful. Those are wonderful answers, and as we should be, right? We should feel grateful for the privileges that we do have. And now, moving on to why then people experiencing homelessness are more affected in this COVID times, right? We felt this is, we're living in this pandemic for the past year. So it is important for us to start off right off the bat talking about how they have been affected. And first of all, no access to social distancing. So it is very difficult for them to follow CDC guidelines, for instance. In the shelters, they have to put the beds further apart, but they still have the same space. So they end up having less beds, and then less homeless people can stay in these shelters, right? It is just very difficult, which brings us to hard to stay hygienic. Most public places have been closed that have access to public bathrooms, right? And shelters, they aren't always the cleanest places. And lots of times, homeless people, they choose to live in tents, on the street, in campments, and is just less hygienic, but also provides them with more social distancing. So maybe lots of them had to make that hard choice. There is an unequal access to healthcare. So at first, people were getting tested and then just released back to the streets while they awaited their results. The unhoused people, they disproportionately suffer from lung disease and heart disease, hypertension, cancer. Homeless populations, they're also more transient and mobile, so it can be more difficult to track them, test, and then prevent the transmission. Mental illness. So lots of homeless people suffer from mental illness, and they may not understand or be able to remember the risks, or they may be stressed out about other things that COVID doesn't seem like a big issue to them. Shelters staff, they're working twice as hard to meet minimum needs, and they had to restrict services due to lack of staff as well. So there is a focus on meeting basic services like cleaning and food and laundry. No volunteer activities that benefit the clients have been able to happen. So health literacy classes, even game nights, unable to provide as high a quality of care, right? The shelters haven't been able to, just by the amount of staff in the shelters, that is very difficult. And there are negative results associated with failure to accommodate substance use disorder. Now, when it comes to vaccination, their vaccinations are being given at shelters and hotels and encampments. So beginning in February, vaccine clinics, they were set up at shelters, hotels, and encampments across the district, and in order to bring the vaccine to clients, right, to the residents. In order to answer questions and address concerns about the vaccine as well, town halls were held at each shelter, led by Unity Healthcare and DC Health medical professionals. So this was very helpful because lots of our homeless population, they're very hesitant when it comes to the vaccine. And now over to Claire.
Thank you, Bella. So despite all of those struggles that make people experiencing homelessness much more vulnerable, shelters have been making some efforts to prevent spread within the shelter system. So there is an effort to move medically vulnerable people to more permanent housing. So medically vulnerable, so again, a lot of people experiencing homelessness have conditions like heart disease, hypertension, diabetes. So a lot of people fall into this category. And so the city might not have enough resources for all of them, but since as of February 22nd, 2021, which is the most recent data I could find, 165 people have moved from shelters or these temporary hotel units to permanent supportive housing. And there's about another 109 currently in the system, again, as of February 22nd, so just a little less than a month ago, waiting to be placed with more resources to connect them to these permanent housing centers. So work is being done. People are being helped. The issue is that there's just so many people to help that it's almost impossible to give everyone the resources that they need. Bella and I think both mentioned a couple of times these hotels. The city has several isolation and quarantine sites around the district. These are used for people experiencing homelessness if they are test positive for COVID, come into contact with someone who has tested positive for COVID. They are moved to these sites where they can quarantine for 14 days or until they test negative for several times so that they can stay safe and keep everyone else safe. This also helps the shelters because we've had to limit the number of beds. And so by having less beds and having these other sites, we can still serve more people. The shelters have also extended their hours. Usually in normal times, shelters run from like 7 p.m. to 9 a.m., somewhere in that time frame. During the day, the people leave and the shelter staff get all their work done. They clean and they meet one-on-one with their clients for case management and all that stuff. Because we have extended hours, they're a lot busier, and that's why we can't do all the things that we usually do with our clients. But we have tried to enforce the same shelter, same bed policy to reduce any spread or extra contacts with other people. So if you come to a shelter, you're expected to come back to that same shelter, sleep in the same bed so that you're around the same people. Shelters have also staggered meal times and moved to a more grab and go system. So instead of sitting down together, people get their meals and go. This is obviously beneficial for COVID reasons, but takes away a lot of the community and support system that people have. A lot of times they don't have a lot of other people outside the shelter system who really they can talk to or understand. So socially, it has been a bit detrimental to the people. In order to accommodate more people, less space, we've also, when I say we, by the way, I mean the city, not necessarily Catholic Charities. The city has opened hypothermia sites in addition to these isolation and quarantine sites. So usually during the winter, we open sites such as rec centers or places like that, where people can go to get a bed as additional housing because the shelters just can't hold everyone. Because in the winter it's really cold and it's dangerous to sleep outside. So since the beginning of the pandemic, they have opened these additional hypothermia sites pretty much year round to accommodate these social distancing rules. And then, of course, the city has been providing PPE to staff and residents. And if you want to do a little service project, you can sew your own face masks and donate them to Catholic Charities, and we will give them to our frontline workers and clients. So here we have just a quick little chart that goes from June 2020 to January 2021, and it shows the number of tests conducted at shelters and isolation and quarantine sites. So let's just look at the January 2021, because that's the most recent data. You can see that the city has conducted over 1,700 total tests, and of those, 70 have tested positive. So those people and anyone who's come in contact with them have been moved to those isolation and quarantine sites or told to remain there if they were already there for their safety. Obviously, it's hard to test and trace everyone because, as Bella mentioned before, it is a very transient population. However, the city and Unity Healthcare are really working extremely hard to do their best to track and trace and keep safe all their clients. This chart here shows the availability of isolation and quarantine sites versus the occupation. So it's great to see from this chart that it looks like the availability has always been more than the need, at least since, I think this is from April 2020, if I'm seeing that correctly. So that initially looks good. And you're like, okay, people who are in need are getting the care that they need, they're going to these sites. But again, the question is, well, how many more people out there are we not aware of who could be in this site, who are not staying in the shelter system that we can't keep track of, who refuse to go to the isolation and quarantine site for whatever reason. There's a ton of reasons why people would prefer to stay on the street, even if they are tested positive, instead of going to a shelter system. So it's great that we have these resources to give to people who are vulnerable and that somebody have taken advantage of them. But you still have to ask yourself, okay, there might be some missing information here. So, trying to dig into it a bit more, which unfortunately we don't have time for today. Okay. But now, Bella and I are going to stop talking at you for a minute and we're going to do a little activity. You should hopefully have gotten an email from Ms. Kofi or your teachers with an attachment called Tough Choices. We are going to put you into breakout rooms for, I think, 3, maybe 5 minutes, just because we're a little short on time. We want you to read through that scenario, and there's a couple discussion questions you can talk through as a group. So Bella, I think you have to make the breakout rooms because you're the host. You can just assign automatically. Give us just 1 minute.
I'm gonna just copy and paste the text of that into the chat in case there's students who didn't receive it. Does that sound okay?
Oh, perfect.
Okay.
Can they see the chat if they're in breakout rooms?
I'm sending it to everyone, so I think so. I'm gonna go ask Molly, who's sitting outside right now, and double check.
Bella, I think we should call them back at 9, because I think this period ends at 9:10.
All right, I'm going to unmute myself. That's one of my students. Gabe, do you see your breakout room? Got it. I don't know if you wanted me to go to one or not. I'm just one of the teachers, so I kind of let them
You can stay here.
I really appreciate what you guys are doing this morning. Thanks for giving us your time.